wasn't that fascinating. A lot more positive, if I'm honest with you, than I thought. I think there are many bumps in the road. You know, the climate change bump in the road, if we can call it that. That's a pretty epic one. Geopolitics and many other things, I think, are coming into play. So, yeah, look, it's good to be positive and constructive. So I was really pleased to hear that, Chaz and Stuart. But the thing that kept coming out for me is we need innovation. We need some new ideas. We need some fresh blood. So I know, having worked on the Influence e-mobility competition we've just run and just closed and we're judging this month, perhaps brings up some good ideas, some new talent in that. So I'm really looking forward to doing that. You've been doing this a long time. I know e-mobility isn't anything new to you. I know the business is a fresh focus purely on that. But what did you think? What was your sense of what you heard? What do you think, Chaz?
Well, I agree, Roger. I think it was a really interesting response, you know, from all the panelists. Everyone was very positive. But as you say, it's not an easy thing to do. And, you know, transforming a whole society to electrified vehicles requires massive input from everyone, not least companies like Influence e-mobility, who are here to communicate that change and target customers and companies to tell those stories as well.
Yeah, and can I ask, just for, well, in fact, Stu, perhaps you can give us a flavour of this then. So is it just, we talk mainly there about UK, let's be honest, but we've got the EU, we've got the whole world, and the dynamics of change are profound all around the world. You've got hugely different variables. So as a quick one, the metric of ownership in cars is vast. So it's 22 out of 1,000 in India, about 580, I think it is no, 850 in the USA. It's about 190 in China. So you've already got a massive disparity of car ownership in itself around the world. So is your business and what you heard just now applicable to the whole world, or were we a little bit parochial in that discussion, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Roger. You know, listening in, you know, I thought it was a fascinating debate, and I think, you know, you teased out many of the kind of key issues that are you know, going to actually decide the pace of change here. But as you say, you know, there are so many regional differences to this, and I think there was definitely a bit of a bias towards the UK and probably towards Europe, really, in terms of a lot of what we heard. But I think the overall trend, certainly from our perspective, where we sit as Influence e-mobility, you know, our clients are basically across the world, and you know, their business is on a worldwide basis. You know, I think the overall trend is very much towards, you know, the rapid acceleration of electrification. You know, the pandemic has very much accelerated that trend further. And, you know, again, it comes back to the point of the whole panel is, you know, are we yet at the tipping point? You know, are we past the tipping point? And again, what is a tipping point? You know, that, as you said at the very start of the panel, yeah, you know, that's the thing. You know, I think from our perspective, you know, we are past the point of no return, but there are still many, many issues, very complicated issues, as to, you know, have we, you know, getting to that critical mass, as you got into in the discussion, and the panelists were very eloquent on it with their different perspectives, is, you know, there are a lot of issues around the battery, you know, and the advances in battery technology. There's a lot of issues around the charging infrastructure, and then there's a lot of issues around, you know, the manufacturers, but also, you know, around, as we heard quite a lot from Tim, about, you know, actually how the consumers actually purchase these vehicles. But again, you know, one last thing was, you know, there was, what struck us is in the communications business, you know, there was a lot of issues around consumer education, but also all the panelists referred to perception, you know, driving reality, or perception and reality, which I think goes to the heart of a lot of the issues in EVs.
Going back to what we called the event, the meetup. I'm going to name drop. I'm shameless in this, you know. It's a very bad habit I've got. But I met Malcolm Gladwell just at the time he was publishing The Tipping Point. So I know the book well, and I'll be frank with you. I've used that, a lot of the stuff that's in that, to to do what I've done in the last 20 years. I met him in 1999. And so for me, the definition of tipping point is, and you kind of alluded to it, is an unstoppable force, is something that you've triggered that can't be, can't be stopped. You've turned on the taps, as it were. But you're right. I think there's still many more things to come in. The play between batteries and charging infrastructure. The reason why we're screaming for charging infrastructure is because, well, the reason why, we've got such range of batteries at the moment is because we're screaming for charging infrastructure. If we can get ubiquitous, easy charging, we don't need all these big batteries. I mean, we did talk briefly about that. But for me, the reason why that was a good panel, and I genuinely say it was that they all have skin in the game. They all are individuals with businesses, money, investment, risk, all sorts of things involved in it. And thinking of the audience, a lot of the audience for this investment community, I think one of the biggest challenges for the United States and for Europe and other countries outside of China particularly is how to get the investment balance right, given that China is dominated by state intervention. And when you look at state intervention on a monumental scale for things like mobility, things like energy and stuff like that, that makes a massive difference. That's a huge, huge trigger of change. So I think that there needs to be a bit of squaring up around this. I thought Graham was sort of quite nice and polite, to be honest with you. It's nothing personal to Graham, but I think we should be much more strident, for example, with the battery factory business, where we should say the government are going to offer match funding. If it's going to cost 2 billion to build a battery factory, the government will put in 1 billion. Not just willy-nilly, they want the money back, but it should be something on that sort of scope and scale.
And as Graham said, Roger, I mean, British Volt's obviously right out in the front. They're going to build Britain's first gigafactory for which is going to be on stream at the end of 2023. But we need 5 or 6 of these. So we don't just need. I mean, British Volt are going to invest upwards of £2 billion, but that's 5 times £2 billion. That requires an enormous amount of investment, and those investors need the right information. They need the right communications themselves to know where to place their bets as well, don't they?
Well, they do, and the capital markets like a degree of certainty, or they certainly want a narrow band of risk. But then when they hear, whether it's people like me just following on from what I've heard, talking about potential change in battery chemistry, the shift towards more charging, which will reduce the need for batteries, the potential for autonomous vehicles and maybe not making so many cars as such. All of that then probably feeds into their thought of, well, hang on a second here, where is this actually going? So that's why I think we need a rebalance of it, that it's not just purely private money or predominantly private money. It should be substantially a 50-50 play, in my view, match funding. But what do I know? I'm just some geezer that hangs out on LinkedIn and shares a bit of stuff.
No, I think you're pretty well informed, but no, these are in our view some of the key issues, and I think it's all interconnected. That's the thing. And that's why it was such a good panel today, because you got together some of the key stakeholders, as you say, with blood in the game, and actually, you started to get into some of those key issues, which, in our opinion, is the key to actually the future. And I think you alluded to it towards the end, Roger, with some of your comments that when the new batteries come and the price parity of electric vehicles starts to get closer to the ICE cars and ICE vehicles. Indeed, you talked about vans as well. And then the charging infrastructure improves. Then you start to, and consumer education gets better and knowledge. Then you can start to see a scenario where at the moment people still want 350 miles from a car, but they don't actually need it, because the average journey in the UK is 8.4 miles, and yet people want a car that does 350 miles. In the States, even in a vast country like the States, even when you get out right in the boonies, it's 48 miles is the average journey. 48 miles when you're in the middle of nowhere in the States, that's the journey.
But Stuart, with all respect, I don't like averages because averages belie the extreme. So when people say average CO2, temperature change of 1.5 degrees, that for me is a really not a helpful way of framing, because what that actually means, think it's a global average, is that at the poles, it's about 5 or 6 degrees, which is like catastrophic in terms of, ice cover. And so the same in terms of range there is a bit like, yes, it's an average, and that we know how that's made mathematically, but there are lots of people who do much more than that. And if they don't see that an EV is either capable of it with the battery or capable of it with the battery and the charging, then it's just not going to go anywhere near it. So I didn't wish to be,
no,
I said I was going to be an agent provocateur, didn't I? So
but this is why it's quite an interesting debate, because if you want to get the price of the electric vehicles down, and as when you get down to the miles per minute of the charge, which is where we think it will go, then if those start to really join up, then the price of the vehicles will accelerate down as the battery technology improves, as the infrastructure improves, and that will then accelerate, certainly past the tipping point at that point, and again, these are these sort of really interconnected issues that makes this such a, such, as you saying, such an exciting and fascinating sector that this is now. This is a 100-year-old model of the automotive industry, and yet in the next 5-10 years, it's going to change more than it's done in the last 100.
And the answer is not clear cut, Roger. I mean, there's a poll which Edison are running. I mean, it's early days yet. I mean, not everyone's going to respond yet, but a very simple question: have we already reached the tipping point in the transition to electric vehicles? 58% of people think yes, but 42% think no. So
wow,
there's still much debate to be had by the look of it.
There is, and you mentioned Stuart there, and we've talked about it in the panel. It's exciting, there's challenge, there's opportunity, but let's equally acknowledge it's also pretty scary. For a lot of people who've invested, particularly dealers, especially dealers, but including manufacturers and many others, tier ones, tier twos, etc. They are all at the moment thinking, well, what is actually going to happen? I keep hearing different things. And again, if you look at the range of predictions from all the people out there, whether it's, Bloomberg or Benchmark or some of them are diametrically opposed, informed, roadmaps as to what will happen. And how do you anchor your future on those sort of things where there isn't real kind of clarity or certainty or a consensus of just what's going to happen? So yeah, I do think the panel was particularly fruitful in coming up with some specifics, and battery charging, interconnection between dealers, OEMs, etc., and the public. It was a good selection. So whoever put those guys together did a good job. Wasn't me, by the way. I wasn't trying to be clever there saying that. But listen, I think we can probably wrap up now on that sort of thought. But can I ask both of you then the question that was asked of the panel and other people? So Chaz, are we at a tipping point now, in your view, in regard to mass adoption of EVs?
I don't think we're at a tipping point for mass adoption of EVs. I think that will come. My personal prediction is that will come in around about 2025, 2026, when we start to see price parity between EVs and conventionally powered cars. But I do think we're at a tipping point in the sense that we're on the road. We're on the road to electrification. There's no doubt about it. Governments all across the world are starting to put dates, hard dates in the diary where petrol and diesel engines will be banned from being produced. And that means we're on the road, whether we like it or not. And I personally love it, and so do all of our clients. But whether you like it or not, we're on that road. So that's one tipping point. But the next tipping point is when we start selling more EVs and petrol cars. So we're not there yet.
I do know plenty of people actually who hate it. I've got to be honest with you, Chaz. They are not just scared, irritated and annoyed by it. And I do actually think it's important to acknowledge those people and try to embrace them as best as possible, because the one thing I know I do too much of is spend a lot of my working life in a bit of an echo chamber where we all kind of say to each other, yeah, it's the future. And that's okay. But I do think we should be out and about with the contrarians and the people who are, vehemently against it. But Stuart, have the final word. What is, or where is, or are we at the tipping point of electric vehicle adoption?
Well, I'm very closely aligned with my my co-director, Mr. Hallett. But
that's good.
But my slight twist on it is that I think we're past the point of no return. If you look at the key stakeholders, the government, if you look at the car manufacturers, if you look at the suppliers, if you look at the infrastructure, if you look at the energy companies, and most importantly, if you look at public sort of sentiment, I think we're that journey, that train has left, to mix the metaphors here. But to Chaz's point, I don't think we're, if you talk to the really big car companies, that it's about 2025 that they get to, the best ones get to price parity. That's also about the same time that the next generation batteries, the ultra fast charge batteries, come in. It's also the point that the infrastructure, certainly in many of the more developed markets, starts to really get to the point where you don't have much impediment to traveling around. You won't be able to quite charge your car as fast as you can fill it up with gas, but you won't have much of an inconvenience. And I think at that point things will really start to accelerate. So that's my perspective, Roger.
Yeah, well, I think it's a good perspective because you've been in the industry a good while, and of course you know the people, the dynamics to it, and all of that. So it's important. The final thought I would like to just chuck in is that let's not forget there are huge swathes of the world that we don't talk about enough in these discussions, and what's going to happen there. So South America, Africa, India, much of the EV discourse is about China, is about America and Europe, but the nearly 8 billion people that live on the planet don't all live in those places. So I do think it will be healthy to have more exposure, involvement, engagement, and knowledge of those other massive continents and populations, to understand what their kind of ambition or skin in the game might be in this journey. But for now, yeah, great panel. I love being part of that. 3 really fantastic guys. Thank you for your perspective on it from influence. I'm really looking forward to announcing the competition winner at the end of the month, because that's all about somebody that can make a difference. And I know you've put in this very generous prize of a year's free PR and marketing support. I'll nudge a few things on LinkedIn. So again, that's putting your money where your mouth is, literally. Thank you for that. But thank you for inviting me to host this and be part of it. It's been something I've not been so aware of, the Edison proposition, but certainly the City of London and all the people making investments, they want to know what's going on. So if we've managed to share some of that and put some of that across, then maybe we've done a good job today. So thank you.
Well, can we thank you, Roger, as well? I think you've you've done an absolutely brilliant job of hosting this and then really sort of teasing out all the perspectives. So thank you.
It's a pleasure. I learned so much being a host. Honestly, it's one of the best jobs because you just get an inside track as to what's going on. So on that note, thank you to everybody watching, and we'll see you again sometime in the future, hopefully. Goodbye.